All right. The last part of this tutorial is the UI side. So the UI, you can make it a bit more complex or you can make it very simple. For example, I'll show you what I mean. Essentially, only two things that you need, really. First is the event creation page, which essentially is a form where you collect the inputs from the user and you hit create, which is where we make our API call. And once the API call has responded with a success message with basically our design ID and image URL, we then want to open up a event card, which basically contains the design we have received back. And also just two options. One is to open image and one is to shuffle image, which is basically making another call to kind of refresh, to get a new image back. So, but the reason why I have 4 pages, so 1 page and 3 components, is because for the cover image, for the image style selector, and also the layout, basically our template ID selector, I made them into separate components so we can visualize what that looks like. But if you don't want to, essentially you can abstract these two away, or if you want to give user the ability to configure them, you can easily just use like 2 drop downs so they can select them very easily, essentially removing the need for the image style selector I have and also the layout selector I have. So it's really up to you on how complicated or how fleshed out you want the UI to be. But the general idea stays the same, where you will have a form kind of page to collect, for example, the image, the event name is a text input, location, and date and time. And one detail that we want to make sure we have is we want to enforce the character limit. And the reason is because with what we have set up here, essentially what you want to be considerate about is the length of text element that can be in here. For example, if we make it really, really long, you can see that it's breaking the design. So essentially, you want to know the limit of the text element that can be put into each tagged element, text element. And then on the UI side, you kind of make sure you lock it a little bit so it doesn't break the design when the image, when user put too many text in each text element. So that's like a detail that you want to make sure you do on the UI side. But otherwise, it's pretty straightforward. You collect these values. And then for the cover image selector, what I have is basically a container with an action hooked up, where the action is actually going to open up the bottom sheet of image style selector. And I enabled, and the action output variable name, which is selected image style. How to set up this one, it's basically going into our image style selector. It's basically like a list of image. So essentially the logic is every time they click on a specific card, you close the bottom sheet, and you also make sure when the bottom sheet is closed, you actually pass a value back to our main page. So as you can see, if I go back to this action chain, when the bottom sheet is opened up, if on the component side you enabled a value upon closing the bottom sheet, you will see the action output variable name here. And then you can name it so you can refer to it later. So what I then did is I set up a page state, which you can do here. If you select the page here. And on the page state side, I have 2 states that I set up. One is for image style, one is for template ID, which are both selected on the from a bottom sheet. So that's what I mean. If you want to make it more complex, that's what you need to set up. But if you go with like a drop down, 2 drop down, essentially you don't even need to have a page state to keep these 2 selected values. Essentially, when you hit that API call, you can essentially just get the value from all the input values, text input values, and also 2 drop down values. But because I want to make it a bit better for the users, where they can see what template they're selecting and what image style they're selecting, this is what we need to do. We need to set up 2 local page state variables to record what the users have selected for either image style and template ID. So on the template ID side, it's pretty much the same idea. You open up the layout selector, and as you can see, I also have the action output variable name here set up, and that's because on the layout selector side, I also made sure that when the user click on the card, we close the bottom sheet, and also we make sure that we're passing like a string value, which is respective template ID for each one of them. And so on the main page, when the bottom sheet are closed for both style and also layout, we actually update the page state variables to keep record of what template ID the user has selected and what image style the user has selected. And then we have a image prompt text input, so the user can define what kind of prompt they want to use to generate the image. And now this is the most important button. We open that up. So just to demonstrate, so essentially you want to add a API call action, and you want to have we want to select the group, which I have, but for you can simply select ideate create design if you are not on a paid plan where you only have individual calls. So you don't have to select the group, you simply select the call name. And for me, I selected my create design call endpoint name. And for the variables, these are all the variables that we have set up on the API side, right? And we just went through them. And essentially what you need to do is just for image prompt, you make sure you get the value from text field. You can simply select image prompt, text field image prompt. And then for event name, you make sure you get the text field value, event name, location, same thing, location, and date, text field, date and time. And image style, because we're not using two dropdowns, right? So we're actually getting that from our page state image style, and also template ID is from our page state template ID. So, and the action output value for these API call, I just named it created design. So the next one is if you add the API call, right, this condition is automatically added for you. And generally it would just be if created design is successful. What we want to do is we open up our event card, which is where we display the design to our users. And what we want to pass in are, I basically passed everything in, but because the setup we currently have, all you need to actually pass in are these parameters that we just passed in. They won't be, so you will have to click on define and then come here to the event card to define all of them first before you can pass them in. But that's exactly what I did. I kind of set up all the parameters that can be used. And then after the API call is successful, we open up the bottom sheet. As we open up these bottom sheet, we pass all of the values in here so that we can use these values. For example, for the image path, I have gotten that from our component parameter design URL, which is an image path. You can see that all the other values can be used because on Flutterflow, if you want to populate an image, even though technically they're all string, but you have to specifically set up the design URL to be an image path. And that's exactly why on the API side, when we did our JSON path, we actually switched that to an image path. Image prompt, which is from our text field. Design ID is not what we have currently, right? It's actually received from our response from the API call. So what we actually did is we want to receive created design, which is the output value I have defined. So created design, make sure you select JSON body and predefined path because we have named some shortcuts, right, on our API side when we set it up. So we can use a predefined path, which it's called design ID. And for the image design URL, it's the same thing, predefined path, design URL. And for the image style, this is from our page state. So now on the shuffle image side, what essentially we need to do is we actually need to make a new endpoint called shuffle image. And this will be a very similar endpoint that we have set up previously. So essentially what we can do is we duplicate these API call. We duplicate these API call and we call these IDA shuffle design. And for the body, because with this shuffle design, we call that shuffle image. The only thing we want to refresh to shuffle is the image, right? So essentially, we don't even need to pass in date because we want them to stay the same. Event name, we want them to stay the same. And location, we want them to stay the same. And all we need to pass in is the same image prompt and the same image style, or even a different image style if you want to make that happen as well. And then basically run the API again. And the template ID, essentially what we want to pass in is the design ID that we have received back. So that's the very simple setup. All you need to do is just delete the ones that you don't want to further edit and keep the variables that you want to be further edited. And keep the variables that you want to be further edited as variables and also as the body object. And also make sure you pass in the design ID as the template ID. So that's the setup we're going to use. As you can see, where we have a shuffle image endpoint and the image prompt. And that's the reason why we want to pass image prompt as the component parameter in here. And that's also the same reason why I want to pass the image style back in here. And for template ID, again, we want to use the design ID instead of the actual template ID, because otherwise you will also need to pass in all the other variables again. So this is a very simple way to actually change design. It's basically, you can think of the new template is now the design that we previously generated, and then we want to make further edit to that design. So all we need to do is to pass in variables that we want to use to further edit what we have. So all the elements, for example, the title, the event name, the date, the location will be untouched, and we're only going to shuffle the image to get a new image back. And when this API call is successful, we want to open up the event card again, which we then pass basically the new image URL, design URL, the new design ID in, and pass in the new image prompt and also the image style in. And basically it's going to open up a new bottom sheet with a new design where the user can open that up. All I did is just launch the URL, which is the image URL that we have received. We call that design URL, and then that will launch into a new page, and that will open that up, and the user can download from there. So yeah, a quick walkthrough on how the UI is set up. So yeah, the really only two pages you need are where you serve the final design to the user and where you collect inputs for the API call. The other two components is really just my choice, a way for users to select image style and also the layout, basically the template ID. I'm going to make these projects clonable so you can go back and see how I set it up, and maybe you have a different way to set it up. It's up to you, but the most important part is actually how to use our playground on the IDA side, how to set up a template on the IDA side, and how to use the playground, the example code to set up the API call on the Flutterflow side. And the rest, you can look it up yourself and then make however the user interaction that you want. Yeah, let me know what you think. If you need further help, feel free to join our Discord channel. And also you can reach us from basically our website at ideate.xyz, and you can join our Discord to get access and also to ask for help. And you can also book a demo with us if you want to integrate these. If you want us to help you build some automation with our API, we're happy to help you. This is it for today's tutorial. And until next time, ciao.